Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Balch and my guest is Lois Dean. Welcome, Lois.
Good to be here. Thanks, Gavin.
It is indeed. We've had a nice little chat together, and you're kind of a local. You started off in Melbourne.
Yes, I was born in Oakley, lived here till I was 12 years old, then shifted to Adelaide with my parents, and then early in our married life, my husband and I shifted back to Victoria.
Okay, and working class background?
Yes, my dad worked as a purchasing officer, a milkman, managed a dairy. What else? He was a salesman as well.
All of those things before we had to do certificate 1, 2, 3, 4,
Exactly,
right?
yes.
How many children in the family?
My family or my parents' family?
Parents' family.
I was the eldest of 5 and had 3 brothers and then a baby sister who was born when I was 17 years old. So
she sort of almost grew up an only child.
Yeah, she did. I guess one of my brothers was home for a while, but then, she was an only child after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've moved out of the state, of course, when you were married, and spent a little bit of time in China because your husband was teaching what?
Oh, yes, that's right. We, I guess we'd been married for at least 20 years when we just felt we'd like to have a bit of an adventure, and my husband was interested in teaching English in China. So, we headed to China in the late 90s.
A lot of change you would have seen in that country?
Yes, it's an amazing country. We were in a very poor province, but even in the city, there was a lot of wealth, but you would still see a lot of poverty as well. And then out in the countryside, people were still living much as they would have been living 2,000 years ago.
Okay. Now, you were concerned about little people. Tell me about some of the little people.
The little people. Okay. So are we talking about babies?
Yes.
Initially when we went to China, it was before my husband was teaching English. We went to work in an orphanage. The state-run orphanage had released a property to be renovated to become a model baby unit. And so we went over there. My husband was heading up the renovation team. And actually at that time, I had our last child with us, and Hannah was only a baby. We went over there, and we were there when the first babies were brought into that unit.
So were they all kind of strapping bonny babies?
Well, it depended how soon after birth they arrived in the baby unit. So sometimes those babies did arrive looking relatively healthy because they had been left at the main orphanage when they were quite young. But then we were in the midst of the renovation, and so there were 2 bonny strapping babies in the unit at the time. But then when we arrived, our fellow workers said to us, "Oh, there's another baby down in the orphanage, but we really can't take another baby yet." And so he stayed down in the orphanage, the main orphanage, for 3 to 4 months before we were able to bring him into the unit. And when he came in, he was skin and bones, and he'd stopped crying because he found out that really crying didn't help, and he was being looked after by a 5-year-old girl. She was the one giving him his bottle. The adults who were meant to be responsible for his care didn't really care.
Wow. There's a thought. There's a picture. Paints 1,000 words, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Wow. All right. Now, you mentioned there that you took your youngest child to China.
Yes.
Okay, but you weren't young when you had her.
No. I was 45 when Hannah was born. We had 3 teenagers when I became pregnant with Hannah, and by the time Hannah was born, our older children were aged 20, 19 and almost 13. So, yeah, quite a gap.
Okay, we're going to look at that part of the story a little bit later on. But good for you.
She has been an absolute joy. Best thing we ever did. I remember when Hannah was a baby, and I'd say to the next one closest to her, Adam, who was 13 at the time, I'd be downstairs, and I'd go upstairs to attend to her and come down, and I'd say to Adam, "Oh, there's a baby up there. There's a baby up there," as if it was some sort of miraculous event, and in many ways it was. It was just amazing. We just all thoroughly enjoyed having a baby in the family.
At a later stage, my parents, who only had me, were 47.
Okay.
So that's why I connected with that component of the story.
Okay.
And I didn't like being an only child.
Yeah.
So when I did get married, I wanted to have lots of kids.
Yeah.
Okay. So you didn't want Hannah to be alone, did you?
No. I was hoping that I would be able to have another baby, and when I was 47, I was pregnant again, and we were really thrilled about that. But unfortunately, when I was 7 weeks pregnant, I fell downstairs, broke my arm, and it was suggested that I needed a general anaesthetic to fix the arm. It's still ununited to this day, and the arm isn't fixed. And I didn't realise at that time, much to my grief at the time, that a general anaesthetic probably is not a good idea when you're 7 weeks pregnant. And so at 11 weeks, I miscarried. And that was a really difficult time. I caught that little baby, and it was like I was holding my baby, and God had given me a name for that baby, and it was Timothy James. Timothy means precious to God. And I just knew that straight away I just felt how precious every little baby is to God. And as I held that little baby, that it wasn't 11 weeks, because he just had a head and a body and little arm buds and little leg buds. I felt like I was holding my baby. It was just incredible. And so I was grateful for that, but very sad to lose that little one.
We'll keep that thought and that picture. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Balch, and my guest is Lois Dean. Lois, we just touched on a very intimate moment here. You've had this terrible fall, which would have been traumatic. Broken elbow. You go to hospital. You're given this anaesthetic, and it's not long after that you have this what you now see as a chemically induced miscarriage.
Yes. It was very difficult, because I did spend a bit of time worried and concerned that even the doctors hadn't alerted me to the possibility that a general anaesthetic, with just all of the chemicals obviously and drugs that are involved with a general anaesthetic, may have that effect on my body. I'm probably thinking that because I already had 4 children and was aged 47 at the time, that they thought it wouldn't matter. They probably thought they were doing me a favour. But when I held that little one, I was grateful that it actually happened at the ultrasound clinic. I'd gone to have an ultrasound to see if there was a heartbeat, because I'd been experiencing some pain. And it was at the clinic I actually lost the baby when I went to the bathroom, and I held that little one, and I was very grateful for the radiographer who was with me at the time, because I felt as though I was sharing my little baby with her, and that there was someone else there also admiring my little baby. And then I needed to release that little one.
Okay, and of course, here's me, a male, so removed from nurturing and this attachment, okay, and the thought that there may be many women who have a miscarriage and catch the child.
Yes. It's I'm sure it's something that probably happens a lot these days, especially we now in Australia have RU486, an abortion pill available readily on the market, and even just recently there's been a new foundation that's making it available via a phone call. And what happens is that women are encouraged to take drugs in order to induce an abortion. What they probably don't think through is that when that occurs at home, they're going to see what is commonly called the products of conception. And for some of these women, many of them are probably expecting to see a blob of jelly. But in actual fact, what they see is a fully formed little baby with a head. Yeah, a person with a head, a body, depending, by the heart would have been beating, and there would be arms and legs forming. And it is devastating, I'm sure, for these women when that happens.
It is really a very graphic moment, and something that we deserve to give its true reflection and consideration that here we are taking chemicals that are going to really impact the person and cause a miscarriage. Now, you've had a number of miscarriages.
Yes, I have.
Do you mind just briefly saying how many?
Well, counting that one, I've had 4. My first pregnancy was a miscarriage, and then before our youngest daughter was born, I had 2 miscarriages. That was at a time when I'd decided that taking the pill wasn't the best thing for my health, and that's another whole story about the possible side effects of the pill. So my husband and I had just felt in our spirits that we were to surrender family planning back to God, because we could trust him with our whole lives. And so in that process, I really hadn't considered whether I'd have any more children. However, I became pregnant almost straight away when we were no longer using contraception, which in itself was interesting because we're in our early 40s. And but I miscarried that one very early on in the pregnancy, almost became pregnant straight away again, and another very early miscarriage. But the interesting thing that happened for me in all of that was I then felt very maternal. I went from the space of thinking, oh my goodness, we're not using contraception, maybe I'll have another baby, but we don't want any more babies, what will that mean? To desperately wanting to have another baby. And I've realised since that connection that we mothers feel when they first conceive, and that miracle of conception has happened, it's just incredible. And so it was like that. I was obviously already maternal. I already had 3 children and loved them dearly, and they were our whole lives. But then that desire to have another baby was still there. So sometime later, we went possibly for 9 months then without having another conception, and then I was pregnant with Hannah.
Right. So we're talking about this kind of euphoric realisation that you're a great mum.
Well, and that being a mother almost trumps everything else, because at this time I'm actually a physiotherapist, and I was in my own physiotherapy practice prior to Hannah's birth. So yeah, at this time I'd been working as a physiotherapist, and that was my whole life. I was so fulfilled in caring for my husband, my children, and I was a physiotherapist, and I was able to work with people and help people, and I loved it. But then, even when I was in my physio practice, and it was in a small, a rural town down on the Bellarine Peninsula, I would, people would greet me as, oh, hello Lois, so this is my physiotherapist. And I would want to be Lara and Toby and Adam's mother. I just wanted to be a mother, and I recognised that motherhood is such an awesome responsibility and such a privilege.
Well, on that note, you're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Bolch, and my guest is Lois Dean from Pregnancy Counselling Australia. Now, we're talking about what a woman experiences.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this just about children and nurturing and being a mother, as well as having your own physio practice and so forth.
Yes, yes.
Let's just touch on the grief too of the miscarriages. So there's a sort of a counterpoint, a contrast here. What's going on? What did you feel?
With I just felt that tremendous loss of, I was looking forward to having a baby, for Hannah to have a sibling her own age. It's just the loss of all of the potential of that life, and not ever knowing now exactly, although I felt I was given a name, but I don't know who he would have been, what he would have liked to do. Was he going to be creative like Hannah? Was he going to be a sportsman like one of our others? Was he going to be, a health professional? My eldest daughter became an OT, similar to my physio profession. Was he going to be more practical like my husband, who loves to work with his hands and do things? We just never know now who that person was going to be. And the grief was overwhelming initially. So
are we really saying here that we need to talk to someone?
Yes, definitely. I think it's important for people who have suffered miscarriage, and there are counsellors available, and we at Pregnancy Counselling mainly speak to people who are facing unplanned pregnancies and who are just not sure what to do. And this, with an unplanned pregnancy, it wasn't scheduled into their life. This wasn't what they were intending to do. However, for a woman, that bond with that little person growing in her womb is something that she perhaps doesn't even realise is there until afterwards. If they go ahead and have a termination because it wasn't part of their plan for this time, they can be just more than overwhelmed with grief. It's a different grief to when you suffer a miscarriage. That's hard in itself, but not the same as deliberately deciding not to allow this baby to continue.
Okay. Now, in all of your experience, you've had your own children, you've had 4 miscarriages, but you adopt as well.
Yes. When we were in China, I had the opportunity to foster a little baby girl, and it was very difficult because my husband was teaching English. This was a new job for him, and this little baby waking in the middle of the night, disturbing his sleep, was just a bit too much, and it was possible to hand her on to a Chinese foster family who then continued to foster her until she was adopted to America. However, in the midst of that process, I realised I could love another child that I hadn't given birth to. And so we pursued adoption, and we actually adopted James, the the little baby who came in so emaciated to the orphanage, and that was a miracle in itself that we were able to adopt him. So he's now a lovely young 18-year-old man. So we're very blessed. And then 2-3 years later we adopted Grace, who was actually, it was more than 2 or 3 years later, because Grace was 7 when we adopted her, and she's now 16.
Right, now we're going to spend a moment or two on Grace, because we're talking about the sanctity of life, the preciousness of giving an opportunity for a child to live its or her or his life out.
Yeah.
And so Grace has a handicap. Yeah,
Grace has an intellectual disability.
Right. Okay, but these are not disabilities or handicaps, are they?
Yeah, Grace, she's just amazing. She is so attuned to life around her. She loves people. She makes friends really easily. She loves playing sport. She plays basketball and netball, and she would play football as well if we let her, but there's a limit to how much she can fit into her week. She's also very creative. She loves to draw. She's an amazing young lady.
Okay. Well, here's this quiverful of children adopted, loss, going through these horrific experiences that us guys don't quite get, of tragedy, loss, grief, and joy of being a woman having a child.
Yes.
So tell us about some of the children, where they are, what they're doing now, and what would you say to a woman that's watching this show and has been informed of her unexpected pregnancy?
Okay. Well, we have 6 children. We have Lara, who has 3 children of her own. She's an occupational therapist, lives with her husband Hamish, and they have a small farm and attempting to live off the land. You know, it's not doesn't make money as a farm. Lara works as an OT to supplement their income, but they bringing their family up in central Victoria. Our son Toby and his wife Amanda have 3 children, and Toby is an electronics engineer, helping with the NBN rollout, gets to travel all around the country. And then our son Adam and his partner Ange live in Melbourne. Adam trained as he did his master's in philosophy. He's also very interested in social justice issues, and I can never remember exactly who he works for. It's something to do with the Australian Bureau of Statistics and looking at social order and stuff.
Right. So here we are, the person watching has this unexpected pregnancy. You're speaking what into their life?
Well, that every single conception is an absolute miracle of life, and that life is precious. Interesting, the name that I was given, Timothy, means precious to God. And I firmly believe that absolutely every conception is precious, and that you will miss that life even if you don't realise it, that there's something happens profoundly at a deep level in a woman when they conceive, and something happens profoundly if that conception and that life is interrupted.
Lois, thank you so much. You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.